YouTube and Twitter.
Super.
Okay. And we're live. Merry Monday, everybody. Today is July 12th, 2021, and we are so excited and lucky to be joined by Nicholas Schmidle. Nicholas writes for The New Yorker and is the author of Test Gods, Virgin Galactic and the Making of the Modern Astronaut. And I'm so excited that he agreed to come talk to us today to discuss the new commercial space race that's popped up between many, many billionaires and just overall discuss it with us as a group. So, Nick, I wanted to ask you first and foremost, how did you become interested in this topic?
I was interested. I'm not really interested in space, to be honest, which is sort of a bizarre admission. But in 2014, there was Virgin Galactic had suffered this crash, this accident out in the Mojave Desert, and I remember seeing the news alert and thinking there was a little bit like a record scratch phenomenon, and thinking, wait a second, stop. A hand-built spaceship, a winged spaceship owned by a British billionaire who lives on a private island in the Caribbean, is test flying rocket-powered flights in the middle of the desert with test pilots on board. And somebody just died. Like one of the pilots just died. Like, you know, it was kind of like, I thought we stopped doing this stuff. And like, when Chuck Yeager died, And so I went to my editor at The New Yorker and I said, I think that now we can get in the background in a second. I said, look, I think that it'd be a really cool story. I think that I could potentially get into this world a little bit. And he said, why don't you go and see if you could get quote unquote real access? And the concern was always, as anyone who watched Virgin Galactic's live stream yesterday may have gathered, this is a very press savvy operation. And it's a very press savvy operation. The fact that you feel like you're getting a peek behind the curtain, but you're also sort of corralled and everything is very orchestrated. And so the concern was like, can we get into this company and see something beyond just what they want us to see? So I went to Mojave. I met with one. At this point, they had 5 test pilots there. One of the pilots had been, I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he had been a neighbor of ours in Beaufort, South Carolina when I was growing up.
Oh, wow.
And he had been my dad's wingman on the first night of the Gulf War. And he had led the search and rescue mission when my dad had to eject out of an F-18 that crashed into a mountainside in Japan 2 years earlier. So like his wife babysat my brother and I. We went way back. But again, I hadn't seen him in 20 or 25 years. And so I show up, we meet at the sort of premier dining establishment in Mojave, which is the Denny's. And I'm like, no, really? I'm like, listen, I'm on a New Yorker expense account. We can go anywhere. And he's like, no, Denny's it is. So we meet at Denny's, and I said, I kind of gave him my pitch of what we wanted to do. And he said, I'm happy to put in a good word with you. I'm happy to essentially tell the president of the company, at that point, the vice president, that you come from good stock and that we as Virgin Galactic everyone writes about us, but no one actually sort of invests the time. Mm-hmm. And I explained the way the fact checking process worked and kind of what I wanted to do. And so that let me stick a wedge of foot in the door. And I went to the president and I said, this is Mike, the current president, Mike Moses. And I said, look, I want to embed with you all. I want to do what Buzz Bissinger did for Friday Night Lights. I want to come and spend sort of a defined period of time with your company. And the flight that crashed was the 4th powered flight. And I said, I want to stay with you from the 4th powered flight until you rebuild the spaceship and resume rocket-powered flight tests. I didn't want the story to end the way many Richard Branson stories have ended or Virgin Galactic stories have ended over the years, which is with Richard Branson at the end saying, tomorrow's going to be the big day. So we wanted something concrete. And that was going to be 1 year, and then it became 2 years, and then it became 4 years. And in the process, I just continued. The magazine kept sending me back. I had this incredible access. I told them, I said, listen, I want as much access as you'll give me. I want to be a fly on the wall, but I also we're not going to force you. I'm not going to make you commit to letting me be a fly on the wall. Like, if you trust me, great. And so let's kind of, go from there. And so I got to that point and just kept going back and going back and going back. And eventually, not only did I feel like there was a book there, but it kind of like in some ways took over my life. So that's how I got into this project. And it was, for me, it was always much more interesting about the men and women and the people who were out there working on the program than it was necessarily kind of for space. And as we saw yesterday, I mean, they're only in space for 2 minutes. You know,
Right.
It's the metaphor of trying to do something bigger than yourself. That for me was always kind of what was so intoxicating.
It is a very human story, just the entire saga as it goes on. But as you said, it's a very sophisticated operation that they have going. So did you ever feel a tension between them wanting to maintain like certain PR appearances and your own like reporting, or what was your impression of that?
Yes, throughout the process, certainly. I mean, I remember them saying at one point, they said, we've looked at all of your clips and everything you've done so far has been sort of investigating, you know, war criminals and arms dealers and, you know, wrongfully convicted men in Chicago and dirty cops. They were like, should we be worried? I said, no, don't be worried. And truthfully, it actually did feel like I was working a different reporting muscle by just sitting there and kind of rolling, you know, letting my tape recorder roll. But inevitably, once I got in, I kind of was like, all right, I can do my thing now, and I can start, you know, developing relationships and meeting people after dinner, after work for drinks, and so very quickly I started asking questions about at that point, about the problematic rocket motor program, and they were like, oh yeah, you can't write about the rocket motor program. And I said, well, what do you mean I can't write about it? Now I know stuff about it. I can't, of course, you know, so like I'm kind of working multiple games while I'm going through the front door. I'm also developing relationships around the outside. And so there was always a tension of like, once they realized that I was in the house and they couldn't get me out of the house, at times they tried to restrict the access. But by that point, I knew enough people that I could just go and ask. And I mean, I would go into the president and say, I know this happened on such and such a day. Or even better yet, I know there's going to be a meeting tomorrow. Can I attend it? And if you know what you're asking for, then you put them on the back foot. If you're just like, hey, what's going on? What's cool happening tomorrow? Then they can easily say, nothing you'd be interested in. So there was that. The only time that in the first chunk of time, the only episode in the first chunk of time when I was denied access, and this is when I knew that this was a sign of things to come, was on that powered flight, the 5th powered flight. They went up, they landed, and I'd gone into all the pre-briefing, all the pre-flight briefings and all the post-flight briefings. And I was going to this post-flight briefing, and what is his title? He's like the director of commercial operations. He's like employee number 1 under Richard, but he's very slick, and his name is Stephen Attenborough. And he's the glossy sort of face of Virgin Galactic in some ways. You know, Richard is like the swashbuckling persona, but Stephen Attenborough is the guy who goes out and sells this at yacht shows and hedge fund gatherings and all that. And so Attenborough stood in the way of the door and said, you can't come in here. And I thought, okay, either they've now just realized that I've been here for 4 years, and Attenborough I had never seen him. He lives in London. And I think at that point they were like, oh shit, we just let this reporter inside the company for all this long, and now we need to start trying to roll back the access, but by which point it was much too late. So the magazine piece came out in August of 2018. I had a book contract later that week. Everyone in the company's like, oh yeah, we just need to kind of there's some ruffled feathers about the magazine piece. Some people think it made the program sound too dangerous. And I said, well, 3 engineers have been killed and 1 test pilot's been killed. Like, it's inherently dangerous. And from then on, it became very strained, where they tried to make my life difficult. And ultimately, you know, I wasn't invited to the flight last weekend, and so here we are. But yeah, so that tension has existed both for me, but it's a tension that's at the center of the way the company operates, which is that the PR priority. I mean, Richard Branson was not supposed to be on this flight. The PR opportunity arose, and Richard Branson leapfrogged and was on this flight in order to beat Jeff Bezos. So that's the publicity priorities oftentimes supersede the operational ones.
Yeah. So I want to like really briefly, because there's so many substantive questions to ask you about, like obviously everything that you research, but just to talk a little bit more about your methodology. I cannot
Mhm.
tell you how much what you just said resonated. I just got the piece I recently wrote for the New Yorker was this story about the Facebook oversight board, and I did 18 months of embedding inside of Facebook.
Mm.
And all of what you said, it was also very weird because I was an academic, so there was people and a reporter, so I think there was especially hard for people to like kind of know how to trust me or whether to box me or what to do. But what you said is like exactly right, which is like it's not even about what you see while you're in there. It's that you slowly it's like I always say like it's like you become Jane Goodall and eventually they stop forgetting you're not one of the monkeys.
Yeah.
And like they like, you know, and so they'll share their banana with you, and then all of a sudden you're going out to, you know, and this is kind of like how it happens. And it's very weird because there is a sense in which it is manipulative, but if you're doing it right, it's also just like genuine, and all the cards are on the table. Like people should be savvy and should know these things, and they want to talk and tell their story, and like you're facilitating that and you're being honest about it, and like what your priors are. So I love that. But what I'm really kind of curious about is there has been a fair amount of and this is you're in one way a part of this kind of this embedding with big tech and tech projects. And there has been such a kind of, I feel like, at least for me and a few other people that I know, there's been this huge or like the Maggie Haberman, quite frankly, like most recently, like this kind of like backlash against people who get close to these regimes that people see as evil, and they report on them, and then it taints them in some way.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, it's very tempting as a reporter to like try to maintain your reputation by reporting something negative so people know you're against these companies.
Yeah.
Then that's hard because you burn all your sources, but you're always ready to do that, right? Like if you're worth your salt. And so like this, and then like there's also just the telling it how you feel like it happened.
Yeah.
Right? Which maybe might not be what some people want to see or hear, including your editor. So I'm just kind of like curious about how you've managed that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, I had to take two bites out of the apple. I needed to take the bite for the magazine piece, and then once that was done, and particularly once they shut down my access, and I'll share a story in a second about almost going to Richard Branson's private island, and how that went belly up at the last minute, mainly because I wouldn't sign an NDA to say that I was, you know, it was just the whole thing got very out of control. I mean, so to get into the beginning, they and rightly so. They, you know, part of there's this U.S. Regulation called the ITAR International. Essentially, it covers arms traffic. It's an arm regulation law that prohibits the transfer of technology or knowledge about dual purpose technologies, and rocket ships can easily be repurposed as missiles. And so, therefore, this is an interesting quirk. Richard Branson is not actually legally allowed to know the details of his own rocket ship from his US-based company. So one of the reasons, and this has made for a very awkward relationship, is that the engineers who are on the ground in Mojave can't explain. Now, Richard also doesn't have a great deal of interest in getting into the technical details, but they're legally.
He's a big picture guy.
Yeah, right. Well, he's just kind of like he's a scarf flapping in the wind kind of guy. So they said, okay, you know, you can come in and you're going to see things, but you need to essentially agree that you're not going to spill corporate secrets or proprietary secrets. We said, okay, you know, so we hammered out this agreement, and it said, if we tell you, if there's something that's said that is that's corporate secret, we will flag it at the time, and you know, you can't use it. And I was like, fine. So 4 years, never once is it flagged. Not once. We go through the fact checking process for the New Yorker piece. We publish the piece, and then that's it. And the piece comes out. And then I'm writing the book, and I have developed a unique one-on-one relationship with Richard Branson. And after about a month after the magazine piece came out, he emailed me and he said, I'm wary often of reaching out to reporters directly, but I just wanted to let you know that I appreciate all the time and effort you put into the piece, and I think you get what we're trying to do. So we left it at there. Through 2 or 3 months later, I said, "Hey, I'm getting a lot of pushback trying to write this book. I want to get back to the access I had." And he said, "Oh, we'll be able to hammer it out. Don't worry. They're just people are a little bit sensitive about this kind of stuff." But I was like, "All right, well, if the boss says," I kind of wanted to take his email, and I kept joking that I was going to put it on a screen printed on a T-shirt and wear it the next time I showed up at the company. And then so after the second space flight in February of 2019. I saw Richard and he said, "You should come down to Necker Island." I said, "Fern, perfect. Like, tell me when, I'll be there." So we made plans. We had all the boat transfers arranged. His assistant reached out. I went and found the email a couple of days ago. His assistant reached out and said, "Do you have any dietary restrictions so the chef can make sure that we're preparing all of your meals?" I mean, it was ridiculous. And then 48 hours before we were expected to leave, my wife and I were both going down. He's like, "Come down with your wife. I'll be there with my daughter and her kids. And we're going to go to like the private island that's off of my private island where I go with my family." It was like Necker Island, and then it's Mosquito Island, which is right off the top. It's like, "Yeah, come to Mosquito Island. And this is where the Obamas stayed when they came."
I feel like they name it Mosquito Island so no one ever wants to go there.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why we're in the UK, because there are no mosquitoes in this country. It's actually kind of it's pretty ungodly. So 48 hours before, his people, Stephen Attenborough, found out that I was going, and Stephen Attenborough called me and said, "Richard would never disinvite you, but I'm doing that." But he said, "Richard will cover your plane ticket." And I said, "Okay." He said, first he said, "If you sign the NDA extension, we can discuss the possibility." And I said, "There's no way I'm going to sign an NDA extension so that we can potentially discuss the possibility." And at that point, it was actually, getting back to the core of your question, it was liberating because I knew that I had all the material. Of course, you keep wanting more, but I had everything I needed, and now I could write everything clear-eyed. And so that
is liberating. It was the best. It was like, right? I remember getting through fact check with New Yorker, and just like it was one of the most stressful 4 days of my life. But I knew I had everything on tape, and I wasn't under any NDA.
Yeah.
So it was
and in the end, and the existing NDA didn't cover, the original NDA didn't cover anything. So for the book, I hired the same New Yorker fact checker, got this amazing guy named Zach Helfon, and he fact checked.
He's great.
He's amazing, right? he spent 6 months fact checking the book. And
I already pinged my fact checker from last thing. I'm like, "Hey, you want to fact check my book?" So
yeah, it just gives you such. The peace of mind at the end is sort of irreplaceable. So, so your question about kind of holding fire. I when I'm looking at the other space coverage, everything that they have is dependent on press releases. Or interviews with heads of these companies, and partially because once you start doing real reporting, it's very easy for you to be stiff-armed and you're no longer invited to rocket launches and stuff. So I understand what they're doing. Unfortunately, I feel like the coverage is oftentimes kind of flat because there's not much there. So I guess you have to go in. You got to sort of you have to go in, you have to do what you need to do. And unfortunately, on your way out, sometimes you burn the house down, or you burn your bridge as you're leaving. So.
No, absolutely. I think one of the issues that occur particularly in this area now, since it's going to be private companies or publicly traded companies that are doing these flights, you don't have government oversight in the same way. You don't have government requirements of disclosure as far as I'm aware. And so journalism is more important, I would say, now than ever in this particular field.
Sorry, I was just going to sorry. That's my fault. I was lagging, so I didn't realize. I thought that there was a pause and I could ask a question, but go ahead.
No. If it's pertinent, I was going to switch, so please.
Well, I guess what I'm kind of interested in is one of the things that I write about is how, and I guess what we're very specifically seeing in a really heavy-handed way with Elon Musk and Richard Branson is the idea of an industry that was so expensive and so prohibitively expensive and risky as to only be attempted or capable of being attempted by something the size of a state. And now we have private companies that are not only not governed by any one state, they are transnational companies that like one state couldn't kill them, right? Like the US can't kill, or the UK can't kill Virgin, and the US can't kill whatever it is that Elon Musk does. But there's but the general idea is that like there's kind of this idea that like these private companies are reaching into this as like, I would call it kind of like if you have like, it used to be kind of citizens on one side and governments on the other. Now there is this triangulation of something that was always there, but it is like on steroids in a way that it never was before. Right. And we're seeing that in the speech realm, and that's what I mostly write about. But like what I love from what I'm hearing from your, like what you've been talking about and like what's happening right now with Branson and Musk is like, and Bezos is like kind of just that there's this, that they're just reaching literally like government-like proportions, nation-state proportions. And they've kind of been hiding it, and now they're just like not even ashamed of it. They're just like throwing it out there. They're like, yeah, we're going to put like an Amazon flag on the moon, and, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the most startling thing is I was writing this piece last week, the short piece for the New Yorker website, kind of about this petty squabble over what actually is the definition of space and all that. And I was writing this. I had this fact. I had my Jeff Bezos is so ungodly rich fact, which is that, you know, by one estimate last year, he makes $215 million a day. And then last Wednesday, after this Microsoft contract wasn't renewed, it was that Jeff Bezos made $8 billion last Tuesday. And I was like, he made $8 billion on Tuesday. I mean, seriously, you got to be kidding me. So yes, you're right. The amount of wealth is staggering, and the kind of the this is the most naked way to put it on display as well.
Yes, definitely. And I'm going to change my question from before. There is such a tension now with these egos, and it's hard to separate that from the news cycle. Because again, space oddly is so human, and the race to get there just, I mean, for years, humans have been staring at the skies going, what is this? And where are we? And things like that. And so you have this odd eclipse almost of these several individuals who have enormous amounts of wealth, who are putting them into use for their individual space programs. But how do we keep, as readers really, and just citizens, that story separate from the larger story, which I think is less about those individuals, oddly, and more about the programs themselves? Because the last space race really, it helped us so much technologically. I mean, like the laptop that I'm working off of, it was somehow derivative of like a space program. So I just would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. And I'm glad you asked it, because it's a sort of it seems like a bad moment for these companies to be reaching the fruition at which they're ready to start actually putting people into space, because wealth disparity is for all of the social justice and kind of economic injustices, the optics are really poor to have billionaires strapping. And look, the video of Richard Branson in space looks amazing, but like they're just sort of giggling, right? I mean, and it's totally like, wait a second, you're telling me this is not a joyride? Because it definitely sounds like a joyride. And
very expensive.
But is it physically that much different than like a vomit rocket? Like right? Isn't that what they used to call it? Where like vomit comet, like where you go up and then you just like descend at such a rapid pace that you kind of are briefly for like 90 seconds or whatever, defying gravity.
I don't know. I've never done the vomit comet. I went in the center. I did the centrifuge with their test pilots for Virgin Galactic's test pilots, which was humbling to say the least.
Did you barf?
I didn't barf, but
I would totally barf.
I barfed, But I went,
Me
so they
too.
have this little acrobatic airplane that they also, and I'll go back to your question in just a second because I think it's really important, but they have this acrobatic airplane that they take up from when they were all based in Mojave, and they'd go up and they do, they just stress their bodies. It's part of the training is to do these high G training exercises. So the first 2 times I went up, it was before anyone told me you were allowed to take, I don't know, they take some like essentially for newbies, they'll give you some stomach settling thing. And this is when I went up with this guy who had been my dad's wingman, and he's kind of humorless and is he takes everything extraordinarily seriously. And he says to me as we're putting on our parachutes, he says, by the way, Nick, he says, if you don't feel well, don't worry, just let me know. I'm not going to call your old man and tell him that your son's a wimp or anything. And I'm like, fuck, of course I can't. Like now I've just got to, bite my lip. So we go up and we fly for like 45 minutes. And I mean, I am feeling horrible. And there's this little vent, I've got the vent blasting on me. I'm just like still pouring sweat, and we land. And he's like, Nick, I'm sorry. We really want to do a couple more maneuvers up there. And we did that twice. And both times I felt pretty rotten. And then I went up.
He's hazing you.
He's hazing you. Totally hazing. Then I went up though again with Mark Stuckey, who was the test pilot who I write about in the book. And this time I was like, oh, wait a second, we're allowed to take some magic pill that's not going to make me throw up. So we go up, and Mark Stuckey is arguably one of the finest test pilots. I mean, even his peers refer to him as the Chuck Yeager of his generation. The guy is a one in a generation kind of test pilot. So we go up, and he's telling me, I'm like, what is this maneuver we're about to do? He goes, oh, it's some variation of a lamshavak. It's something I saw on YouTube. Hold on. We start tumbling upside down. And at this point, though, I've taken the magic drink or the magic pill, and I'm like, hey, I can handle this. So we get down. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't so bad. Centrifuge, somewhere in between. Again, kind of like I wanted to do it. I wanted to make sure that I experienced it, but didn't need to go and do that all over again. So the program and the benefits, certainly. There were sort of 2 aspects of the story that seemed so obvious, neither of which I had much interest in. One of them, which was Richard Branson, and one of them is space. Like for me, it was always about the test pilots and the engineers. And it was always like the guys who were turning wrenches, the guys with the greasy hands, the test pilots who in many cases, unlike the first generation, unlike the pilots from the Right Stuff, who were at the peak of their powers when they were selected, this class of test pilots are all retired military pilots who have already put in 20, 25 years in the military. They are extraordinarily experienced, but physically they're kind of past their prime. I mean, there's this incredible episode where Mark Stuckey's preparing for this rocket flight, and he sends me a picture from his house on a Sunday afternoon, and he has his helmet in the visor, and he's got a little pin drill, and he's sewing pinholes in his visor so he can stitch his bifocals into his visor. And you're just like, these dudes are reckoning with mortality here in a big way, right? And so that was for me always what was so interesting. And the technological questions are there certainly, which is that you don't know, unless you're exploring and unless you're trying to discover new things, you don't know what technologies or innovations you're going to sort of come up with along the way. And I think that does, people say, well, what's this for? Is this just kind of a joyride? Yes. And I think Richard Branson's notion that we're going to democratize space and we're here to open up space to the wide masses. Come on, dude, you're here to make money. And that's what you're doing. And you're maybe democratizing space kind of in the process, sort of, kind of, maybe in 30 years when someone like you or I can potentially afford a ticket, but we're light years away from that. And in the meantime, it's really about what are you going to be able to figure out in terms of new propulsion technologies that you can use for things that are scientific and or the things that are relatable here on Earth.
But do you think that there's any downside in private companies doing this type of work and being in this realm? Do you think that there is, listen, there are plenty of things we don't trust government with. That's fine. And there's plenty of things we don't trust private companies with. That's also fine. But is this one of them? Is space travel something that we just don't want to? I mean, it doesn't strike me as it is by any kind of there's just nothing in the elements of it that like strike me, is besides it being a tremendous colossal waste of money for the very, very rich, but then that would in theory trickle down in some type of way to like other people or new innovations or whatever else. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious, like, is it bad that private companies are doing this?
I personally don't. I don't have the kind of knee-jerk reaction that, and look, should these guys be paying more taxes? Should they have less disposable wealth to spend on their programs? Probably. But can they do with their money what they want? And I don't have it. Like, I don't think, look, NASA has ceded this stuff to them. NASA has said NASA is not interested in suborbital tourism flights. SpaceX at one point could become a competitor to NASA, but right now, none of these companies have the ability to put a rover on the surface of Mars and fly helicopters around the surface of Mars. Like that is NASA is doing the deep space exploration and the sort of interplanetary stuff. And it's maybe someday SpaceX and Blue Origin will get there. Virgin Galactic, I mean, Richard Branson talks about potentially wanting to be there, but he talks about putting hotels on the moon as well. So, we'll hold that off for a second. Yeah. So, I don't really have much of a problem. I think that it's, let them go for it. And this is the issue. Then there's the whole question of, well, and the passengers want to sign up and pay for it, why not let them go? And this gets back to the question of informed consent and all that. I think it's important that the passengers know what is going on. I think it's important for the public to know. And so the second space flight was in February of 2019. And I knew shortly after that they had a serious problem on the flight, and that the wing, the plies that hold the wing together had essentially come unglued. And when they landed the ship and they brought it into the hangar, a couple of senior engineers and pilots and the president, Mike Moses, whose wife had just been on the ship, all gathered around the ship. And as the former vice president of safety would later say, I don't know how we didn't lose the ship and kill 3 people. So they didn't talk about that at all until the Washington Post got a hold of my book in February of this year and published, kind of revealed that the book was going to reveal these details, but that was not known. And I think it's an important thing to know, because the company didn't fly for more than 2 years. And the question was, why not? And it's like, well, the reason why not is that the ship almost came apart, and they want to make sure it doesn't do that again. So each time they do that, then they build the ship stronger, and it becomes heavier, and it becomes harder to get it actually up into space again, which is why you have this debate about whether they actually went to space or not. Okay.
So you mentioned 2 things, Mars and people almost dying, which make me think of Matt Damon in The Martian. But I actually have, this is actually leading to a kind of serious question. One question is, and here we are in this antitrust for big tech kind of moment. So does more competition actually lead to better and a more competitive space industry that might innovate us to a point where we can get to Mars and colonize Mars? Does the private industry entering the sector help that effort? And then 2, and maybe I think this is just a not fun, but interesting trolley problem, which is what happens when it's not some noble scientist up in a space, and on a space mission for science and their country and the patriotism, but some jerk face who's paid $1 billion for a seat, and we have to somehow spend $10 billion more to rescue them.
Yeah.
How do we do that? I think that is actually a fascinating question for society. I don't even think we're close to being ready to grapple with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, it's something that I had never, your initial question, what sort of piqued my interest and initially, and unfortunately, it's oftentimes some horrible accident or tragedy that kind of gets me into a story and gives me a way to then try and tell a bigger story, knowing that incident is going to sort of play at some point in the reporting. And what got me into this was this crash in 2014. And I'm just sort of wondering about the day that, one of these passengers, like you said, unstraps himself in space and, commits some horrible crime in space. And like, what is that? Like, who has jurisdiction over that when the guy lands? I mean, that's someone should write that movie. We should be writing that movie right now.
Okay, dibs. And,
but the question,
I've got you on video, man. You can't go, no takesy backsies.
Interestingly, the question about competition, though, I think potentially has a little bit of a movie analog, which is the consolidation that you see in movies right now. And a couple of years ago, it was, you can't do, Netflix is the only, Netflix was the only company that was going to allow Martin Scorsese to make The Irishman. And now you're like, okay, so that's cool. But then now Netflix, like, what was the last great Netflix film you've seen? You've seen a lot of entertaining things, but like, what was the last great thing you've seen? It's been a while. So like, I don't know whether, the upstarts.
Ted Lasso? Is Ted Lasso Netflix or Amazon?
Apple TV, but Ted Lasso is fantastic, especially.
Good.
Yeah, well, this is the whole thing. We were talking about it last night. We were, being here in London and watching the game, and I was like, oh, what a Ted Lasso way to end the whole England's run. And then this morning we was like, what would Ted Lasso do right now? I mean, this is the ethos we live with around this house. Anyways, to your question, I don't know competition. I think that these are the upstarts. They're the ones who were like shaking up the monopoly that the U.S. government, that the United Launch Alliance had, and the U.S. government had over launch licenses. SpaceX has broken that monopoly. But the question is, how long before SpaceX becomes that monopoly? That seems sort of inevitable. I don't have a great answer, unfortunately.
No, thank you. So I'm going to start bringing in some of our questioners, but I wanted you, while I'm doing that, to kind of give your impression of yesterday's flight, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. Sorry, I see people also talking about great stuff on Netflix right now that I.
Our chat is like constantly moving, and I can barely keep up with it.
It is really distracting. I'm impressed, though. It's
very clean and very nice. It's kind.
Yeah, it's making my brain do weird different things at the same time. What did I think of yesterday's flight? I think that I think it was a huge moment in the sense that Richard Branson doesn't build stuff. Like, his whole company is somewhat, and I hope that I'm waiting for the haters now. I'm like, okay, these are people who know what they're talking about. But the whole company is sort of Trumpian in its brand management, right? Virgin enhances the customer experience, whether it's in hotels or whether it's in wines or whether it's in condoms or wedding dresses. Like, they do all this crazy stuff. They put a Virgin brand on it. They make it better. And then oftentimes Richard sells out his share, leaves the name on it, and then continues to sort of make money off of the name. So here he comes. He does the same thing with spaceships. He hires this company called Scaled Composites, which is the boutique aviation firm that built Spaceship One that won the X Prize in 2004. Richard Branson said, I want you to build me one of those. It's a little bit bigger for passengers for my space tourism company. And that was the plan. They were going to hand it off to Virgin Galactic once it was all done. And Virgin Galactic was going to put decals on it, put some nice seats in there, and the company was going to be off and running. Then this crash happened. And suddenly, because of the terms of the contract, Virgin Galactic was now thrown into the world of building spaceships and testing spaceships on its own. And it's like, that's a pretty significant foray when you haven't ever built anything to suddenly be building spaceships. So the realization, seeing them do that yesterday, is a pretty huge milestone. And I had always, while I was reporting, was always trying to figure out, is this going to be a cautionary tale, or is this going to be a sort of a victory, a triumph against all odds story? And yesterday, at least for the first phase, was a victory against all odds. Now, will they be able to turn what happened yesterday, which was kind of just a proof of concept when you really get down to it? Will they be able to do what happened yesterday and fly weekly or daily, as they're talking about, to space and back and shuttle these? I mean, light years away from that. And so that's what remains to be seen, is whether they can make a viable go of this as a business.
Okay. I'm going to bring David on for our first question. If there he is. Hey, David.
Hi. Great to see you all. Great to see the Greek choir. So, Nicholas, I really appreciate you coming on. And my question was, should we be bitter about the amount of public money that has gone into Virgin and SpaceX? And maybe I'll just say I'm just straight up bitter about it. What is part of the answer basically doing what you're doing, which is to tell the public what is going on? And how do we get the news out to say, yeah, well, Richard Branson has like zero capital at risk, right? Because it is all being funded, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, the spaceport we saw yesterday, right? I went and found, I was just looking for some pictures this afternoon. I visited that spaceport in 2016. There was no one there. I mean, it is when the crowds aren't there and when the media tent isn't there, it looks from both above and as you drive up, it looks like the Millennium Falcon has been grounded in the middle of the desert. Like, it is bizarre beyond bizarre. And Richard Branson convinced then New Mexican Governor Richardson to get the state government to put up $200 million to build his spaceport. So, yeah, I mean, he's playing with other people's money and has all along the way. I mean, he had money, he put money into it initially, but for the past, Richard Branson, I don't think has put he hasn't had personal money or hasn't injected personal money into Virgin Galactic in quite some time. So, yeah, I could understand the bitterness. I mean, Jeff Bezos, I mean, where do you stand on principle though, right? Like, I like getting stuff delivered to my house. I try and buy books from independent bookstores instead of buying stuff from Amazon. But like, we're all sort of supporting this in some way, shape, or form. When we all use PayPal, we're like, that's Elon Musk. Elon Musk is benefiting from that. So, yeah, I understand the bitterness, but those I think to do something about it requires like real kind of lifestyle choices, which is part of what technology what makes technology so convenient and so appealing.
I mean, I would say that like the difference between this and watching like the robber barons build a railroad across the transcontinental railroad, which was also a huge risk and cost many more lives and everything else, is that it would have a great amount of service to the general population, right? And like, this is just so clearly like a boondoggle. Like, this is just so clearly not going to, in the immediate or even near immediate or even like 50 years from now, it's unclear whether this is going to have any type of payoff. Despite what, like, as like Genevieve like spoke about, like the idea that there might be tech that comes out of it or observations or like lessons that people learn from this type of moment, any type of like influx with really of cash to really smart scientists and really great people is going to give us something. But yeah, it's like hard to swallow. It's a different type of, it does create more bitterness, but maybe people felt bitter about the railroad too and thought it was complete shite. I have no idea. So.
Okay. Our next question is from Richard.
Hello. Oh, let's see. Can you see me? I can barely see me.
Yes, I can see you. Richard, there's a flash flood in Philadelphia. Don't wash away.
Yes,
okay,
please.
Okay, well, I won't muck around in it. So I'm on high ground, so I'm okay. So my question kind of also dovetails with what we've been talking about the costs and public funding and private funding. And so I'm just, what do we know about how much it's actually costing on the government, costing the taxpayer eventually for these missions? There's still government services that have to be undertaken for one of these space flights. How much of that is borne by Virgin? And just in general, what is this? I guess, what is this? What are people saying about what this is costing us on the taxpayer end?
So the only hard numbers that I'm aware of are the ones from the New Mexican state, from New Mexican residents that went to pay for the spaceport. Federal taxpayer dollars, like I'm sure. I mean, when you're suspending, on test flights, they close the airspace. And so, could you say that diversions of government vehicles to get around the closed airspace are costing taxpayer dollars? Maybe, but I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know the answer. And it would be, that space is more related to that the question you're asking is more relevant, I think, to the NASA contracts that are going to SpaceX right now to build the lunar lander, in which Jeff Bezos is objecting to and saying that he should have gotten part of that contract or the whole contract. So like they are fighting for the spoils of taxpayer dollars, but Virgin Galactic less so. And so I can't say authoritatively.
Okay. And then we have Paula. Let's see if this works for me. Hi, Paula.
Hi. Okay, so I was wondering, I mean, you guys touched on this, if the outward facing narrative coming out of like the space tourism, colonization, private community is a bit deceptive. And I want to separate it from the publicity, because I hear like the 100 million people on Mars or colonizing space. And I think I think Caleb Scharf from Columbia talked about this in a Death on Mars article. And he's like, you're going to end up either dead on Mars or stupid from all the radiation. And I don't think, like you mentioned, we're going to see the downstream effects now, because it's just, we're not there yet. But you mentioned informed consent. I wonder, we're going to put people on a 6-month trip to Mars and expect them to go through all the psychological and mental training. And that's going to happen with 1 million people. And I think like you do about these pilots, and he's talked about these pilots are being they're experimental fatalities. That's where you're being asked to potentially risk your life. And I wonder, what's the first civilian, right, who gets on this, rocket and dies? What's going to be that effect, or when is that going to happen?
Yeah, well, so the first question, when's that going to happen? Based on the available data about fatality rates for human spaceflight, it's going to happen sometime in the first, 3 times of the next 100 flights. There's going to be an episode. So that's kind of historically what the accident rate has been. I agree with you wholeheartedly. When I looked at the pictures from Mars of the helicopter, I thought, all right, so that looks pretty wild and crazy, but it sort of looks like places where I've been in the middle of freaking nowhere in Eastern Kyrgyzstan, and I have no desire to ever go there again. And so, it kind of looks like the least hospitable parts of Earth. And why would one want to go sort of colonize? It just doesn't make none of the colonizing Mars, the push to colonize Mars and the desire to do that is just, I can't get my brain around it at all. So I'm a bad person to ask the why would people want to do that question. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that
But Matt Damon is there. I have it on good authority that if I fly for 2.5 years, I'll have Matt Damon to myself.
But the first paying customer, the first accident will be the true test of the industry. And because you could have test pilots who don't make it or die, and it would be one thing, but it's a whole other ball of wax when the first customer incident takes place.
And I also think it's worth noting that there's a disparate perception and goal from these different individuals and their different companies. The colonization conversation of space really, I think, is more of a Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk discussion.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's worth noting.
Yeah.
And now we have the Reverend Dr. Hillary. Hold on, let's get this to work.
Hello. So good to be with you. Kind of a weird camera angle here, but so I'm wondering, in terms of regulation, we talked a little bit about it, saying how hard it is to do any kind of regulation because of this, transnational nature of space. But it seems like there'd have to be some regulation from somewhere. Would we have some kind of similar FAA type organization? Would NASA get involved? Or is it just kind of a free-for-all? And the other question I have is, do you think there'll be need for religious leaders? And do you think I'd make a good space chaplain?
Yeah, well, the regulation right now it's handled by the FAA, and they don't really know what they're regulating. They, after the accident in 2014, when investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board showed up to investigate the accident, Virgin Galactic pilots and engineers needed to teach them about the system so they could understand what they were actually looking at. And so there is a body inside of the FAA, the AST. I don't know exactly. I forget what it stands for, but it is the commercial space body inside the FAA. I went to this ceremony when in February of 2019, when the FAA gave the first astronaut wings to Mark Stuckey and CJ Sturcow, the first two pilots who went up. And Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, Secretary Chao was the one giving the remarks. And she was just so unbelievably out of touch with a lot of things, but out of touch specifically with like what was going on. There was just they are not a body that knows what's going on. They're not an entity that knows what they're regulating and has, there's no hope that they're going to be the ones to curb it. So, but I do think that there's going to have to be some sort of regulation at some point. I don't know where it comes from. And in terms of religious leaders, I often think people ask me sort of what kind of CEO or what kind of head of the company is Richard Branson. He's not a CEO. He's legally prohibited from knowing anything. He really is kind of spiritual leader of Virgin Galactic. He sets the tone. People follow him. He's charismatic. He's got the hair. He's got the hair. He's got the groupies. That's his thing. So,
definitely. I had never thought of him in that context, but it absolutely makes sense.
But can we talk a little bit about that for just like 1 second? Because I think that this is interesting because I'm in the middle of writing a paper, a very boring, very long law review paper about separating big tech out for the purposes of antitrust into various components, and that they're not all equal, and that Amazon might be a very ripe and traditional or newly traditional component to antitrust, but others are not doing the same thing, and there's not the same consumer price problem that that we've had in the past and everything else. But what I'm interested in is are you feeling like people lump all of these space programs together, like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic? And do you see huge differences in both the internal mechanisms of the companies versus, or just the structures of the companies, how they're run, anything, their goals, and that they're not all the same?
Yeah, they're all three of them are wildly sort of different, and I think you could sort of potentially put Blue Origin and SpaceX in the same category. Both of them, Bezos and Elon Musk are computer scientists. Those companies are built around an ethos that you deal with human fallibility through algorithms, that you can program your way through human error. Richard Branson,
I wouldn't say algorithms. I would say you can build your way out of human error. It doesn't necessarily have to lie in algorithms, not to be but I just feel like it's an engineer mentality that if you build and build and build and reason and reason and reason, you can get to some type of does that make sense?
That's true. But I think yes, that's true. In the end, this comes back. So that's the ethos leading those companies. Whereas Richard Branson is very much the romantic. Virgin Spaceship 2, the vehicle we saw yesterday, Spaceship 2, has extraordinarily little automation. It's mostly, Richard Branson's life was in the hands of the test pilot flying the yesterday in the cockpit with his hands on the stick, leading that ship into space. So, and the ship is very austere. It's sort of mostly cables and it's old school. It really is. Despite the kind of futurism of its mission, it's very old school. And the way these companies are run is also very different. Virgin Galactic is a great place to work. At 5 p.m. Everyone goes home. at SpaceX at 5 p.m., if you haven't finished, Elon Musk comes around, like you're going to be there until 2 a.m. It's a much more, and in some ways you're like, okay, well, you can see the results or you can see the results in the or the payoff in the results. So they have different kind of, they're built around different ideas. And then the other thing is like, the other two, the SpaceX and Blue Origin use a vertical configuration, a vertical launch and takeoff and launch rocket. Virgin Galactic uses, it's an aerospace company. They're flying a winged airplane that has a rocket motor in the back, which again, from a storytelling, book writing perspective, it's far more interesting. From a viable like business, can we do this on a daily basis? Can we close our eyes and press a button and know that the thing that went up and down yesterday is probably going to go up and down today the same way it did? No, because who knows what that guy get 6 hours of sleep yesterday or 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours and 45 minutes. There's so much variability that's built into the humanity of what Virgin Galactic is doing at every step along the way, that it is both the appeal and it's also its Achilles heel.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, what your opinion is. Where do you think that weighs out, though? More on the benefit or a risk? Because there are still things that we have not engineered our way out of, and our best solution to them is still human beings. But I think someone once said that we're the cheapest mechanical solution at this point. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of reasons why the viability, so the philosophy, I want to believe, and it depends on how I woke up and felt that morning. I mean, I want to believe that I want to sort of put all my confidence and faith into humans. And I want to believe that that approach is the best way. But there does seem to be something that is a bit more stable about putting one's hopes in the kind of highly engineered model or sort of the more automated model. Because I think that once you get the system in place, the automated model can replicate it more reliably. Just that seems somewhat inevitable. So that's where I think which company is going to be the one that which company is going to be the one that in 10 years is doing what it says it's going to do right now. I just have a hard time seeing how Virgin Galactic gets there. I hope that they do, because again, it's thrilling to watch, and it's a kind of a more engrossing project. But it's going to run up against its own romance at some point, I fear.
Yeah, I think I love that answer. It's kind of a boring way to end, but I'm very curious, like, how these companies are selling this to their broader shareholders. How are they? Maybe it's a very easy answer, but like, how are they justifying spending all of this money on these like not likely to be profitable projects? Are they split off from them in some type of way? Is that like how they're protecting them? Are they independently funded as like some type of like nonprofits? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, so SpaceX is still private. Blue Origin is still private, and Blue Origin is the vast majority of Blue Origin is still Jeff Bezos's money. SpaceX has government contracts, but it's not. They're not answerable to shareholders. Virgin Galactic is answerable to shareholders, but they were created under one of the they were created via one of these SPAC vehicles, special purpose acquisition companies, things that came along about a year and a half ago and became so faddish, and so you can make future projections, which you can't do with non-SPAC stocks. And so they can make these wild estimates. They can make these unfounded estimates about where they're going to be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that if you don't have people reporting inside the company or reporting around the company or trying to sort of tell people what's going on, they have no way, the stockholders have no way of checking that information. So that is that is a serious hazard, which is like those people who own Virgin Galactic stock everything they know about the company is coming from the company. There's very little independent reporting that's happening on it.
Yeah. Totally.
Minus test gods, which everyone should go out and buy right now.
Yes, please. I also read somewhere very briefly that UBS gave like an estimate about space tourism's value reaching like $3 billion a year annually in like estimated revenue. So
I've seen, crazy numbers too. I don't know where those come
Yeah.
from. I mean, because the thing is, like, the commercial space, those commercial space numbers could be insane. Like, everybody wants to have satellites and have better internet coverage and all of that. I see that I see the boundless nature of that industry. I just don't see where you're going to be able to get rich people to keep putting up money to line up, and who has $500,000 or even $250,000 to line up to keep buying reservations on a 2, 3, 4 minute weightlessness experience.
I don't know. No one knows anything about what's going on and how much money is inside China right now, for example. So like,
Sure.
There feels like a lot of potential.
Sure.
But yeah, go ahead, Genevieve.
I think we're going to leave it there. Everyone, please go out and buy Nick's book. I believe we just put it in the chat, but we'll do it again.
I'll do it again. Hold on. Drew found the Macmillan. Thank you, Drew.
Yes,
found
thanks.
the Macmillan link. So I've been dropping if you don't want to subsidize, hey, SpaceX.
Blue Origin.
If you don't want,
Blue Origin.
fuck, I get them all mixed up. Like, if you don't want to subsidize Blue Origin, go into the Macmillan website and buy Nicholas's book. And if you do want to subsidize Blue Origin, go to the Amazon website and buy Nicholas's book. Either way, go there. And then also, as I said many times, I'll drop it one more time. This is a link to all of Nicholas's past incredible writing on many different topics at the New Yorker, and that is right there. So thank you so much for joining us. This was like
Thanks so much.
really
It's been a lot of fun. I
tremendous
appreciate
hour.
it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
for
we
staying
don't
up
tell
late with
people
us.
that, but shh.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. Have a good night, guys. Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Okay, we will be back 22 hours on the dot.
23 hours.
Oh, 23 hours. Where am I? I don't know.
No, it's okay. I can't ever count this down.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Nick.